You people are cheaters. I will never accept your loan here. Go somewhere else.
What would you do if you were forced to be part of a terrible injustice? This story starts on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday inside a peaceful bank. But a single moment, one woman's cruel words, and one man's impossible decision set in motion a chain of events that would change everyone's lives forever. This is a tale of quiet anger, secret plans, and a revenge so shocking you will not believe how it ends. Stay until the final moment to witness the unforgettable conclusion. If this story held your attention until the very end, then you belong here. For more gripping tales of mystery, suspense, and shocking twists, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new video. Now, I have a question for you. Where in the world are you watching from? Let me know by commenting your city name down below. The air inside the First Mercantile Bank was a carefully manufactured product, chilled to a precise temperature that felt expensive and sterile. It smelled of lemon-scented polish and the faint, metallic tang of anxiety that people often bring into places that hold their money. Polished marble floors reflected the soft, recessed lighting, creating an illusion of endless space. Muted clicks from computer keyboards and the low, respectful murmur of tellers and clients formed a hushed symphony of commerce. It was a Tuesday morning, ordinary in every way, until it wasn't. Marcus stood in the line for the main tellers, a patient figure in a world that often had little patience for him. He was a large man, his shoulders broad from a lifetime of manual labor, his hands calloused and strong. He held a simple deposit slip and a worn leather wallet. His posture was not one of defeat, but of a quiet, weary dignity. He had been saving for months, putting away a little from each paycheck from the construction site, and today he had finally reached his goal. It was a moment of quiet pride, a small victory in a life that demanded many. At the far end of the open plan office, behind a desk with a small, brass plaque that read Mess, Eleanor Vance, Vice President of Client Relations, sat the architect of the coming storm. Eleanor was a woman carved from ice and privilege. Her blonde hair was pulled into a severe knot, and her suit was a sharp, navy blue blade that cost more than Marcus's monthly rent. She surveyed her domain with cold, calculating eyes, a predator assessing a field of docile prey. To her, the people in her bank were not people. They were portfolios, credit scores, and potential liabilities. She categorized them instantly, efficiently, and with a prejudice so deep it was as natural to her as breathing. Marcus finally reached the counter. The young teller, a girl with a friendly smile whose name tag said Chloe, greeted him warmly. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you today?" "Morning," Marcus replied, his voice a low rumble. He slid his deposit slip and a thick envelope of cash across the cool granite. "I'd like to put this into my savings account, please." Chloe took the envelope, her fingers deftly counting the bills. It was a significant sum, mostly 20s and 50s, earned with sweat and muscle. As she began processing the transaction, Eleanor Vance's sharp eyes, which missed nothing, narrowed. The sight of that much cash, handled by a man like Marcus, triggered every alarm bell in her privileged mind. She rose from her chair, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm of authority on the marble floor as she strode over. "Is there a problem here, Chloe?" Eleanor's voice was like shards of glass, cutting through the calm. Chloe looked up, slightly startled. "No problem, Ms. Vance. Mr. Green is just making a deposit." Eleanor's gaze swept over Marcus, from his worn work boots to his simple, clean t-shirt. Her lip curled in a barely concealed sneer. She didn't see a hard-working man. She saw a stereotype, a threat to the pristine order of her world. She picked up the stack of bills, her perfectly manicured fingers touching it as if it were contaminated. "This is a rather unusual amount of cash, Mr. Green," she said, his name sounding like an accusation on her tongue. "I'll need to see 2 forms of ID, and we'll have to hold these funds for a mandatory 10-business-day review period. Standard procedure for suspicious transactions." The air around the teller's counter grew thick and heavy. Other customers paused their conversations, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Marcus's patient demeanor tightened. He knew this dance. He'd known it his whole life. Suspicious? He asked, his voice still calm, but with an undercurrent of steel. It's my money. I earned it. I have my driver's license right here. He placed it on the counter. Eleanor didn't even look at it. That's one. I need a second. A utility bill, a social security card. Something to prove you are who you say you are, and that this money has a legitimate source. I don't carry my light bill with me, ma'am, Marcus said, a slow burn starting in his chest. And that money source is my back. I broke it for this. A low, ugly chuckle escaped Eleanor's lips. I'm sure, but rules are rules. We can't be too careful. This bank has a reputation to uphold. We can't have just anyone walking in off the street with large amounts of untraceable currency. The insinuation hung in the air, toxic and unmistakable. The other customers looked away, suddenly fascinated by their phones or their own paperwork. They didn't want to get involved. They didn't want to see. Marcus's hands, which had been resting peacefully on the counter, clenched into fists. The quiet dignity he carried began to fracture. Anyone, he repeated, the word heavy with meaning. What exactly are you trying to say? Eleanor's mask of professional condescension finally slipped entirely. Her face, sharp and cruel, leaned closer, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss meant only for him, but which carried in the dead silence of the bank. I think you know exactly what I'm saying. We don't want your kind of business here. We don't need the trouble you people bring. Now, take your cash and get out of my bank before I have you removed for causing a disturbance. The words, you people, echoed, a familiar and hateful refrain. The injustice of it, the sheer, naked racism was a physical blow. Marcus's body trembled with the effort of controlling his rage. He was a peaceful man, but every man has his limit. I'm a customer, he stated, his voice now loud and clear, demanding that the silent, complicit audience hear him. I have every right to be here. You have no right to speak to me that way. I have every right to protect this institution from undesirables. Eleanor spat back, her own voice rising to a shrill pitch. She turned and snapped her fingers toward the security desk near the entrance. James, we have a situation. Escort this gentleman out. Now, all eyes turned to James. He was a tall, powerfully built black man in his late 40s, his uniform crisp, his posture ramrod straight. He had been watching the entire exchange with an expression of stoic professionalism, but his eyes, dark and deep, held a storm. He had worked security at First Mercantile for 12 years. He had seen Eleanor Vance's cruelty before, but it had always been directed with a surgical, classist precision. This was different. This was raw, ugly, and personal. He had heard her words. He had felt them, too. For a long, agonizing moment, James didn't move. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched behind his back. The entire bank held its breath. The order was clear, but the morality of it was a canyon. He looked at Marcus, seeing the humiliation and fury on his face, a reflection of 1,000 similar slights he himself had endured. He looked at Eleanor, her face a mask of impatient entitlement. James! Now! Eleanor shrieked, her finger pointing dramatically at the door. The spell broke. James's professional training, the need to keep his job, to feed his family, overrode his conscience. He walked forward, his steps slow and heavy. He stopped beside Marcus, unable to meet his eye. Sir, James said, his voice a hollow, formal tone that betrayed no emotion. You need to come with me. The defeat in those words was more crushing than any physical force. Marcus looked at James, a look of profound betrayal passing between them. It was the look of one brother forced to turn on another by the master's whip, a dynamic everyone in the room understood on a primal level. Marcus snatched his driver's license and the envelope of cash from the counter. He didn't look at Eleanor again. He allowed James to guide him by the elbow, a touch that was firm but not unkind, toward the large glass doors. The walk of shame through the silent, staring bank felt like a mile. The automatic doors hissed open, and Marcus stepped out into the bland sunlight of the ordinary day. James stood just inside the door for a moment, watching Marcus's broad back as he walked away, his head held high, but his spirit clearly shattered. Then James turned and walked back to his post, his face an unreadable mask of stone. He did not look at Eleanor Vance, who was already smoothing down her suit, a smirk of victory playing on her lips as she returned to her desk. The incident, for her, was over. A nuisance had been dealt with. Order had been restored. But for James, standing rigidly by the door, his heart pounding against his ribs, it was only the beginning. The cold air of the bank no longer felt sterile. It felt suffocating. The quiet hum of computers sounded like a taunt. He had been the instrument of a great wrong, and the weight of his complicity settled on his shoulders, heavy and dark. He stared straight ahead, seeing not the polished lobby of a bank, but the searing image of Marcus's eyes. And in the deep, quiet stillness behind his own eyes, a plan began to form. It was not a plan of violence or loud anger, but something far more precise, far more devastating. It was the beginning of a cold, patient, and perfect revenge. The game was on, and the first move had already been made, not by him, but by the woman who was too arrogant to see the enemy she had just created in her own ranks. The rest of the day passed in a blur of muted sounds and forced normalcy. For the other employees and customers of First Mercantile Bank, the uncomfortable incident faded into the background noise of the afternoon, a brief moment of drama soon forgotten in the pursuit of loans, deposits, and coffee breaks. But for James, each tick of the large clock on the wall was a hammer strike on his conscience. He performed his duties with robotic efficiency, his eyes constantly drifting back to Eleanor Vance's office. She was a queen on her throne, holding court with wealthy clients, her laughter now a bright, false sound that grated on his nerves. She had moved on completely, untouched by the poison she had spilled. He, however, was drowning in it. His mind replayed the scene on an endless, torturous loop. The look on Marcus's face, not just anger, but a deep, weary resignation, was a reflection James had seen in his own mirror too many times. He had been the one to put that look there. He had been the hand that enforced her cruel will. The uniform he wore, which he had always been proud of as a symbol of responsibility and steadiness, now felt like a costume of betrayal. It itched against his skin, a constant reminder of his role as her enforcer. When his shift finally ended, the act of walking out of the bank's polished doors felt like a parole from a prison he hadn't known he was in. The outside air was warm and thick with the city's grime, but he breathed it in like it was the first fresh air of his life. He didn't go home. He walked for blocks, his footsteps loud and purposeful on the pavement, trying to outpace the shame that clung to him. He needed to find Marcus. He didn't know what he would say, but he knew he had to try to mend the tear in the world that he had helped make. He found him sitting on the low wall of a small, neglected park a mile from the bank, still holding the envelope of cash. He looked defeated, his large frame slumped, staring at nothing. James approached slowly, his hands held slightly away from his body in a gesture of peace. "Marcus," he said, his voice rough. Marcus looked up. The anger was gone, replaced by a hollow exhaustion. He didn't speak, just watched James with a flat, guarded expression. I ain't got no good excuse," James started, the formal tone of the bank on, replaced by his natural cadence. "What I did back there was wrong. I was wrong. I was just thinking about my job, my paycheck. I wasn't thinking about being a man." Marcus was silent for a long time, just letting the words hang in the air between them. Finally, he nodded, a slow, weary dip of his head. "You were doing your job. She was the one giving the orders. A job ain't worth your soul," James replied, the truth of it hitting him as he said it. "She can't just do that. She can't just tear a man down for the color of his skin and get away with it, because she wears a fancy suit and sits behind a big desk." A flicker of life returned to Marcus's eyes. "She always gets away with it. People like her always do." "Not this time," James said, and as he spoke the words, the plan that had been a vague, simmering notion in the bank suddenly crystallized into something sharp and clear. "Not if we do something about it." Marcus looked at him, a question in his eyes. "We? What can we do? She's a vice president. I'm a construction worker. You're a security guard. She's untouchable." James sat down on the wall beside him. The city traffic hummed around them, a symphony of ordinary life. Nobody's untouchable. They just make you think they are. She thinks her money and her position make her better than us, that she can treat people like dirt. But she's got weaknesses. They all do. She's proud. She's arrogant. And she thinks she's smarter than everyone else in that building. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I've been in that bank for 12 years. I see everything. I hear everything. I'm part of the furniture to them. They say things in front of me they'd never say in a boardroom. Eleanor Vance, she's not clean. Marcus's interest was fully captured now. What do you mean? I mean, she plays fast and loose with the rules when it suits her. She's got favorite clients, rich friends. She approves loans that shouldn't be approved. She looks the other way on paperwork. I've seen her make phone calls, have quiet meetings. It's not all above board. She thinks she's covered her tracks, but she forgets that the cameras see everything. That I see everything. A slow, hard smile spread across Marcus's face for the first time. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who has been pushed to the edge and is now looking down at the people who pushed him. So what's the play? We don't get mad, James said, his voice cold and steady. We get even. Not with fists. Not with shouting. We hit her where she lives. Her reputation. Her career. The perfect, pristine world she thinks she's built for herself. He laid it out piece by piece. It was a simple plan, but beautiful in its precision. James had access to the bank's security logs and the digital archive of camera footage. The incident today would be on there from multiple angles. The cameras had microphones. They had recorded everything. Her hissed insults, her racist demands, his own reluctant enforcement of her will. But that was just the beginning. That was only the spark. The fire, James explained, is her own corruption. I know the dates. I know the clients. I can pull the footage of her meetings. I can find the transactions. We take her racism and we tie it right to her fraud. We make a package. We show the world that her hate isn't just ugly. It's part of a bigger pattern of her thinking she's above the law. Marcus listened, his initial skepticism melting away into a grim determination. And then what? We take it to the news. Higher, James said. We take it to the bank's board of directors first. Anonymously. We give them the evidence, all of it neatly packaged. We let them see the liability she is, the scandal she could bring. They'll act to protect the bank. They'll fire her so fast it'll make her head spin. And then, if they try to sweep it under the rug, we leak it. Everywhere. They sat there in the gathering dusk, two men from different worlds bound together by a common injustice. A pact was forged not in blood, but in shared resolve. The anger was still there, but it was no longer a wild, destructive fire. It was being forged into a weapon cold, sharp, and utterly precise. James stood up. Meet me tomorrow. Same place. I'll have something to show you. He walked away, leaving Marcus on the wall. The weight was still on James's shoulders, but it was different now. It was no longer the crushing weight of guilt. It was the heavy, purposeful weight of a mission. He had a job to do, a different kind of security. He was going to protect the people she preyed on. He was going to balance the scales. Back inside his small apartment, James didn't sleep. He sat at his small kitchen table, a cheap laptop open in front of him. He accessed the bank's remote security system, a privilege his position afforded him. The login screen glowed in the darkroom. His finger hovered over the keyboard. This was the point of no return. Accessing these records for personal reasons was a fireable offense, possibly even illegal. He thought of Eleanor's sneer. He thought of Marcus's defeated shoulders. He pressed enter. The system opened up to him, a digital map of the bank's every movement. He navigated to the archives, his heart pounding not with fear, but with a cold fury. He found a timestamp from that morning. He selected the camera angles that covered Eleanor's desk and the main teller line. He downloaded the files. The progress bar filled slowly, each percentage point a step closer to justice. But he didn't stop there. He began a much more dangerous search, typing in dates and client names he had stored in his memory from months of observation. He was no longer just a guard. He was a ghost in the machine, hunting for the secrets of the woman who thought she was queen. He was collecting the stones that would form the foundation of her ruin. The revenge had begun, and it was being built not in the heat of anger, but in the silent, patient cold of the digital night. The next 24 hours were a masterclass in quiet observation and digital excavation. James moved through his shifts at the bank like a ghost, his presence so routine it was almost invisible. But behind his calm exterior, his mind was a high-powered lens, focusing on every detail of Eleanor Vance's world. He watched the parade of her clients, the smug, entitled men in custom suits, the sharply dressed women who carried an air of impenetrable wealth. He noted the times of their meetings, the duration, the body language. He saw the subtle, dismissive flick of her wrist when a junior banker approached her desk, the cold efficiency with which she dismissed anyone she deemed unimportant. His real work began each night, in the small, dim glow of his laptop. The initial video file from the confrontation was just the key that unlocked a much larger vault of corruption. He cross-referenced timestamps from his memory with the bank's internal transaction logs, which he could access through a backdoor in the security monitoring system. A vulnerability no one had ever thought a guard would be smart enough to find or brave enough to use. He found a first thread on the second night. A loan application for a commercial property development, initially flagged by the automated system for a dangerously high debt-to-income ratio of the primary investor, a man named Robert Davies. The file showed the flag was overridden by a manual authorization from Vance. James then pulled the security footage from the day of that override. There was Eleanor having a hushed, smiling conversation with Davies at her desk. The camera's microphone picked up fragments. "Appreciate this. Ellie won't forget it," and her reply, a low, confident purr. "Of course, Robert. It's what friends are for." The following week, the system log showed a series of large, unsecured cash transfers from Davies' business account to a numbered offshore account that James, after hours of painstaking cross-referencing with public business records, traced back to a shell company Eleanor's brother had set up. It was a bombshell, concrete, undeniable. But James didn't stop. He kept digging, unearthing a pattern of behavior that was both brazen and meticulously concealed. He found a second case, an elderly woman whose savings account had been gradually drained by mysterious administrative fees shortly after Eleanor had advised her to invest in a complex financial product. The paperwork was a nightmare of fine print, but the security footage was crystal clear. Eleanor's face, a mask of feigned sympathy as she guided the confused woman's hand to sign the documents. Each piece of evidence was a stone, and James was building a wall around Eleanor Vance, a prison made of her own deeds. He compiled video clips, audio files, scanned documents, and bank records into a meticulously organized digital folder. It was a story of two faces, the public face of the professional banker and the private face of a greedy, prejudiced, and utterly corrupt individual. He met Marcus in their now usual spot in the park, transferring the files onto a cheap, untraceable flash drive. Marcus plugged it into his phone, his eyes widening as he scrolled through the evidence. The video of their own confrontation was visceral and ugly, but it was the other files that truly horrified him. "My God," Marcus whispered, watching the footage of the elderly woman. "She's a monster. A real-life monster in a pantsuit. She thinks the rules are for other people," James said, his voice flat. "She thinks her money and her whiteness make her bulletproof. We're about to show her how wrong she is." The plan was set. They would not go public, not yet. The first move was more surgical. They would send the entire dossier to the three most powerful members of the bank's board of directors. These were men and women who valued the bank's reputation above all else. The package would arrive anonymously, but its contents would be so explosive, so damaging, that they would have no choice but to act. They would see Eleanor not as a valuable vice president, but as a catastrophic liability, a walking scandal waiting to detonate. The following Monday, James executed the final phase with a calm that surprised him. During his lunch break, he walked 5 blocks to a library with public computers. He created a new, anonymous email account. He wrote a short, precise, an utterly professional message. To the board of directors of First Mercantile Bank, asterisk. Enclosed, please find evidence of serious misconduct and fraudulent activities undertaken by Vice President of Client Relations, Eleanor Vance. This evidence includes documentation of racially motivated denial of service, fraudulent loan approvals for personal gain, and the deliberate targeting and financial exploitation of vulnerable clients. Asterisk. This material is being provided to you first as the governing body of the institution. We trust you will take appropriate action to rectify this situation and uphold the integrity of First Mercantile Bank. Asterisk. Sincerely, asterisk. A concerned party, asterisk. He attached the folder of evidence. His finger hovered over the mouse. He thought of the look on Eleanor's face when the security guards she so casually commanded would instead be escorting her from the building. He thought of the stunned silence of the employees who had witnessed her cruelty. He thought of Marcus, finally able to walk back into that bank with his head held high. He clicked send. The email vanished into the digital ether. There was no fanfare, no dramatic chord. It was done. He erased the browser history, logged off, and walked out of the library. The sun was bright. The city was loud. Everything looked exactly the same, and yet everything was about to change. Back at the bank, the afternoon dragged on with an agonizing slowness. James resumed his post, his senses heightened to a razor's edge. He watched Eleanor. She was in a particularly vile mood, berating a young intern for bringing her the wrong type of coffee. She was oblivious, living her last hours in her kingdom, completely unaware that the walls were already closing in. Then, at 3:17 p.m., he saw it. A woman in a severe black suit, whom James recognized as Amelia Gable, the bank's stern and notoriously discreet head of human resources, emerged from the elevator. She did not look around. Her expression was grim, her pace direct. She walked straight past the tellers, past the desks of junior bankers, and stopped at Eleanor's office. James held his breath. From his angle, he could see Eleanor look up from her computer, a flicker of annoyance at the interruption quickly replaced by a slightly puzzled smile. Ms. Gable did not smile back. She said a few quiet words. Eleanor's smile froze, then melted away entirely. Her face lost its color. She looked around, as if for help, for an explanation, but found only the curious glances of her subordinates, who had also noticed the unusual visit. Slowly, as if in a dream, Eleanor stood up. She smoothed her expensive suit, a gesture of pure habit, a last, futile attempt to maintain control. Ms. Gable gestured toward the elevator. And then Eleanor Vance, vice president, was led away from her desk, not as a ruler, but as a prisoner. The elevator doors swallowed them whole. A profound silence fell over the main floor. The clicking of keyboards stopped. The hushed conversations died. Dozens of employees exchanged wide-eyed looks of pure, unadulterated shock. What had just happened? Firing a vice president didn't happen like this. It happened behind closed doors, after hours, with a quiet severance package. This was a public perp walk. James allowed himself a single, deep breath. Part one of the revenge was complete. But as he stood there, watching the confused and whispering employees, a cold certainty settled in his stomach. This was not the end. A woman like Eleanor Vance, humiliated and cornered, would not go quietly. She was a scorpion, and her sting was yet to come. The real shock for everyone in the bank was still waiting in the wings, ready to make its entrance. For 3 days, the bank existed in a state of suspended animation. The air was thick with unasked questions and frantic speculation. Where was Eleanor Vance? Official memos from the executive floor were brief and useless, citing only internal personnel matters. The silence from the top was deafening, and it fueled a wildfire of rumors that swept through every department. She had been fired for embezzlement. She had quit after a nervous breakdown. She had been recruited by a rival bank. The stories grew more outlandish by the hour. James moved through the chaos like a rock in a river, his expression giving away nothing. He knew the truth. He had set the wheels in motion, and now he was waiting for them to complete their turn. He had seen the board members arrive early and leave late, their faces grim. He had watched the HR department working behind closed, soundproof glass, their movements hurried and tense. The machine of corporate damage control was grinding away, and he knew exactly what it was processing, his evidence. On the fourth morning, the atmosphere shifted again. A notice went out for a mandatory all-staff meeting in the main lobby at 10 a.m. A ripple of anxiety went through the employees. This was it. They were going to be told something. As they gathered, a nervous energy filled the vast marble space. People stood in small, whispering clusters, their eyes darting toward the small raised platform that was usually used for announcing quarterly results. James took his position near the back, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the empty platform. Marcus was not there, but his presence was felt in every corner of the room. He was the ghost in this machine, the reason it had been thrown so violently out of balance. The bank's CEO, a man named Richard Thorne who was rarely seen outside the top-floor executive suite, walked onto the platform. He looked older than his photographs, his face lined with stress. He was followed by the stern head of HR, Amelia Gable, and two other senior board members. Their collective seriousness sucked the last of the whispers from the room. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the nervous rustle of clothing. "Thank you all for gathering," Thorne began, his voice amplified by the small microphone clipped to his lapel. It sounded scratchy and too loud in the tense silence. "I'll be brief. It is with deep regret that I must inform you that Eleanor Vance is no longer with First Mercantile Bank. Her termination was effective immediately as of Monday afternoon." A collective, sharp intake of breath swept through the crowd. It was one thing to suspect it, another to hear it confirmed so bluntly by the CEO himself. Thorne continued, his words careful, chosen by a team of lawyers. This decision was not made lightly. It was the result of a thorough internal investigation that uncovered serious breaches of our code of conduct and our most fundamental company values. Values of integrity, of respect, of service to every client, regardless of background. He paused, looking out over the sea of faces, many of which were staring in stunned disbelief. The bank will be implementing new mandatory training for all staff on ethical client relations and implicit bias. We must learn from this. We must be better. It was a standard corporate speech designed to acknowledge a problem while immediately slamming the door on it. It was meant to be the end of the story, but James knew it was only the beginning. He had not risked everything for a closed-door firing and a bland speech about company values. His revenge required a full, public autopsy. As Thorne finished and asked if there were any questions, a strange thing happened. The bank's main internal video screens, which usually displayed stock tickers and market news, flickered and went dark. A second later, they hummed back to life. But they did not show numbers or graphs. They showed Eleanor Vance's face, large and clear, her lips curled into that familiar, ugly sneer. The audio that blasted from the speakers was her voice, sharp and venomous, hissing the words everyone had heard but now heard again in horrifying, high-definition clarity. Asterisk, I think you know exactly what I'm saying. We don't want your kind of business here. We don't need the trouble you people bring. Asterisk, the effect was electric. A wave of pure, unadulterated shock paralyzed the entire lobby. Jaws dropped, eyes widened in horror. People physically flinched at the cruelty amplified through the speakers. They watched, mesmerized and appalled, as the video played out their colleague's humiliation in brutal detail. They saw James's pained expression as he was forced to comply. They saw the triumph on Eleanor's face. Before anyone could react, the video cut to a new clip. Eleanor at her desk, laughing with Robert Davies. Asterisk, of course, Robert. It's what friends are for. Asterisk text scrolled next to the video, detailing the fraudulent loan approval, the figures, the offshore account number. Then another. Eleanor with the elderly woman, guiding her hand. Documents flashed on screen, highlighting the predatory fees. Clip after clip, fact after fact, a devastating montage of corruption tied to the racist act they had all witnessed. It was all there. The two faces of Eleanor Vance were spliced together, proving that her bigotry and her criminality were branches of the same poisonous tree. The CEO and the board members on the platform were frozen, their carefully managed narrative utterly destroyed. They looked at each other in panic, completely helpless. This was not a leak. This was a digital bomb detonating in the heart of their institution. And then, as the final video clip ended, a single line of text appeared on all the screens. White on black, simple and devastating. This is what happens when you mistake a person for a problem. Asterisk. The screens went black. The silence that followed was absolute. A vacuum of sound so complete it was louder than any scream. For a full 10 seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. They were all trying to process the tsunami of information that had just washed over them, obliterating their understanding of the world they worked in. The spell was broken by the sound of the main glass doors hissing open. Every single head in the lobby turned as one. Marcus stood there. He was dressed not in his work clothes, but in a simple, clean button-down shirt and dark trousers. He stood tall, his shoulders back, his head held high. He did not look angry. He looked dignified, resolute. He met the gaze of the stunned employees, the horrified CEO, the speechless board members. His eyes finally found James's at the back of the room. He gave a single, slow, almost imperceptible nod. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the light of the day outside. The shock in the room broke into 100 pieces. Some people began to cry quietly. Others looked sick. Many just stared at the empty space where Marcus had been, the meaning of the final message crystal clear. He was not a problem. He was a person. And he, along with the silent man in the security uniform, had just held up a mirror to the entire bank, forcing them to stare at the ugly reflection until it shattered. The revenge was complete. It was not violent, but it was utterly destructive. It was not loud, but its message echoed in the silence. Eleanor Vance was gone, her reputation in ruins. But more than that, the comfortable, complacent world of the bank had been exposed and broken apart. Nothing would ever be the same. James finally allowed himself to look around at the aftermath, at the stunned and shattered faces of his colleagues. The weight was gone. The scales at last felt balanced. He had done his job.